Welcome. Thank you for joining our Best Practice Series webinar. I'm Becky Melody, your hostess for today's presentation. Brian Coddington, USDM Vice President of Cloud Technology, and Larry Isaacson, CRM Practice Director, will be presenting. The discussion will cover introductions, webinar logistics, and our discussion topic, legacy application migration to the cloud. The USDM team is proud to have Brian leading our USDM Cloud Technology team. He offers nearly a decade as Senior Executive in the cloud space, and he possesses in-depth knowledge of sales and marketing, service and support, the processes, and the best practices. Brian helps companies maximize their investment in cloud-based CRM with a very hands-on delivery style. He has supported over 100 projects on Force.com. He's very experienced with mobile, data migration, custom development, and integration, and he provides customers with significant return on investment and high levels of adoption. The USDM CRM Solutions team is very strong with Larry Isaacson at the helm. He offers over 20 years experience in the application of GXP compliant IT technology within life science organizations. Larry has experience in manufacturing, software development, and clinical and laboratory contract services management environments. He recently led the implementation and validation of FDA-regulated global ERP laboratory and quality management systems. And he has experience in establishing IT and quality strategy project and change management programs. Larry has held the position of Director of IT in pharma, biotech, and medical device companies, and he holds a Master of Sciences in Pharmaceutical Research Sciences. Many of you know the USDM team is focused exclusively on life sciences, and we're the market leader in providing quality and regulatory IT compliance professional service solutions. We do that through project teams as well as staff augmentation. We're headquartered in Santa Barbara, California, and we've delivered more than 1,000 successful projects with over 300 life science clients. We offer hands-on experience assisting clients under regulatory distress, and we're the market leader for offering validation accelerator packs. Our various dedicated practices include global quality and auditing, IT and virtualization, life sciences in the cloud, of course, our UDI track and trace practice, GRC, our laboratory practice, which includes systems and equipment, ECM, ERP, PLM, enterprise quality management. We have a manufacturing practice, our clinical and drug safety realm, business intelligence, project management, again through offering support of entire projects or staff augmentation with our project management team, and our customer relationship management practice, of course. The information today, the content of our slide presentation will be covered in approximately 30 minutes, and then we'll invite you to post any questions for the team via the message board. You'll find it in the lower left of your screen. We are happy to address any questions offline should they be of confidential nature, and you can join the conversation out on our LinkedIn USDM group or shoot us a note at usdm@usdm.com. Thank you again for taking the time to join us, and with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Brian.
All right. Thanks, Becky. Again, this is Brian Coddington, VP of Cloud Technology for USDM, and for the webinar today, what we're going to be looking at are which apps make sense to move to the cloud, what are the concerns and pitfalls to avoid, what are the costs, time frame, and SLAs to expect. And then Larry is going to talk about compliance considerations for legacy GXP application cloud migration. And then we're going to have some time for Q&A. Okay, so what types of apps most typically are moved to the cloud? There's really not a set list. So what you want to think about are which of your legacy applications would benefit the most from what the cloud can provide. And these are in the areas of mobility. So cloud applications just handle mobility better. A lot of them have pre-ready versions for a smartphone or a tablet where you can swipe in order to get from one record to another, or they can do visual recognition through taking photos and posting them to records. So, mobility is a great advantage that today's cloud applications can provide. Speed and ease of change. As your business changes, your applications need to change. So if you have a legacy system where creating a new field or building a report is just too time-consuming, then that would be a great reason to move over to the cloud. Collaboration. Today's cloud apps are just more collaborative and social by nature. You can easily bring in all members of a team in order to all collaborate on a project or a deal. There's great tools that are built into cloud applications that provide a very collaborative environment. Cost is another one. You are in a different cost model with a cloud application. You're not buying software and hardware. You're kind of using it as a service. So even though you might be a small company, you can get all the advantages of a very enterprise-based system and just pay for the amount of licenses that you need for your users. Less IT infrastructure. I kind of mentioned, you're not buying hardware, you're not loading software onto servers. That is a great reason to move a legacy application to the cloud. The areas where we do see legacy apps most often move to the cloud, just a list here: CRM, sales and marketing, lead management, doing things like quote to cash. Now, this wasn't always the case. I would say 2-3 years ago, there really wasn't a great way through cloud applications to have that full sales cycle, from quote to actually doing transactional processing of purchases or procurement. You can do that now with cloud applications. Customer service is big. Case management, tickets, complaint management. Those are all have great solutions that are available in the cloud. Project management is big. On the life sciences side, asset management, trunk stock is something we're seeing people really wanting to build out in the cloud. And then also records management. Okay, so again, that's a small list of what you can do in the cloud. But really, you want to be thinking about the mobility, speed and ease of change, collaboration, cost, plus IT infrastructure as you think about which applications where it might make sense to move to the cloud. Okay, concerns and pitfalls to avoid. I've certainly seen a lot of these. Maintaining compliance is a big one. Your application today, it's on-premise. Yes, you've had it for a while, but it's compliant. And you've done the auditing. You've got all the documentation to prove that. What's going to happen when you move that application to the cloud? And Larry will be speaking to that more a little bit later in the presentation. You want to be concerned about costs. It's a different model. We're talking about licenses and services, a pay-as-you-go model. This isn't something that you just buy once for the base package. Sure, you're going to be paying annual maintenance fees, but you're either paying for a monthly contract or annual. When you do go multi-year contract, you will usually get a lower price from the vendor, so make sure you look into that. There are ongoing support costs with cloud, just as there are with on-premise based systems. So you want to make sure that you understand what the cost model is there. And then plugins and add-ons. So cloud applications, they do a lot, but they often don't do everything. But many of them have an ecosystem or different vendors that provide add-ons to their product. So where the cloud vendor can claim that they do it, well, maybe they don't, but a partner does. But that partner's application that bolts on to your base cloud application is going to have its own cost for that functionality. So make sure as you are looking at the cloud application itself and then the add-ons, you understand the prices for each. Yes, service level agreements are big. You don't own this. You're not responsible for maintaining it. So what happens if it goes down? What happens if you try and get support and it takes too long? So SLAs are definitely a concern. Something to avoid is buying cloud-based applications without an implementation plan. I see this a lot because you could call up today with a credit card and buy a cloud-based application for your department. You can buy it for your whole company, and they can turn it on, and boom, you're ready to go. These are the ones that I see fail most often when they don't have a plan. So, yes, it is a service. It is something that can just be turned on, but it still requires all the same requirements gathering. The design, the building, in order to build it just the way you need it. And we're not always talking development. We might just be talking consideration, but there still is a build phase. Then there's a testing phase to make sure that everything works. And then there's deployment, and then being able to handle ongoing support internally. So always have a plan. Also, you want to bring in the necessary management and IT support. So make sure that everybody's on board with the new cloud paradigm, that they understand how it works, how it needs to be realized on the books. You're talking, it's not an asset now, it's actually an expense. So, and then IT. Again, I've seen sales directors and directors of customer support, and God bless them for taking the initiative and buying a system in order to help their department. But when you leave IT out, it can sometimes create trouble because IT is often responsible for doing the ongoing support of the application. IT often has a good implementation methodology. So make sure that both management and IT are represented in your evaluation and selection of a cloud-based system. Okay, so I want to go a little bit more into the detail around costs, time frame, and SLAs. So if we look at the costs column on the left, as I've mentioned before, license cost, it's on a per user or per year, per user per year, or a cloud application may not break things down by users and just do a single annual fee for your whole company. So make sure you understand that. When it comes to implementation, even though cloud applications tend to be implemented faster than on-premise applications, the costs are comparable. And that is because cloud expertise right now is in high demand, and they can charge higher rates. The supply of cloud expertise just hasn't caught up to the demand. So that kind of offsets some of your implementation savings. So what you would pay to implement an on-premise system is about the same as you pay to implement a cloud-based system. Rule of thumb, as far as implementation costs, 1 year of license costs is equal to the one-time implementation cost. So if licensing for all of your users works out to be, let's say, $100K per year, just kind of figure it's probably going to cost $100K for that one-time initial implementation. Okay? Ongoing maintenance costs, they are less due to lack of hardware, software upkeep. Also, ease of changes and enhancements. Cloud applications doing changes and enhancements can be easier and faster than with traditional software. So that leads to a lower cost. Next column over, time frame. Cloud is faster to implement due to available tools, test environments, open architecture, and again, no hardware, software installation. The actual time frame really depends on the number of users and number of processes. What we see on average is that a process such as sales, marketing, or project management will take 3 to 6 months to deploy. And there are things that may change that amount of data that you're migrating from the legacy system into your new cloud-based application. Integrations can make that time frame go up or down based on how many you need and how complex they are. SLAs. I'm going to hit this list somewhat quickly, but these are great things to think about as you're negotiating a contract with a cloud vendor. So make sure you get everything in writing, for each piece of the service, because you might be getting different packages from the same cloud vendor. And just make sure what the service level is for each of those and what happens if anything goes wrong. Second point, know how your company owns your data. Sure, the cloud vendor owns the framework for that application, but you're putting data into it. So if you want to leave the service, make sure you understand how you go about getting your data back. You want to make sure that the system infrastructure and security standards that are being maintained by the cloud vendor are compliant, and that you have the right to audit their level of compliance. Lastly, make sure that you understand how much it's going to cost to use their service and get their support ongoing, and then if needed, what's involved with discontinuing using the service. Okay, use case. I wanted to provide a real-world example of a 1,000-person medical device company that recently went through a legacy application migration to a cloud-based system. So this customer wanted to update their customer service and field service applications. They selected Salesforce, Service Cloud, and ServiceMax. And ServiceMax is a cloud-based field service application. They needed 150 total licenses, and then 150 people were involved with customer service. 80 of those needed the ServiceMax piece because they were actually out in the field. These were technicians, these were dispatchers, and so they needed the ServiceMax functionality. Now, from a migration standpoint, they wanted 5 years of customer support tickets migrated from the legacy system into Salesforce. That was big. Some of you may have less than 5 years. Some of you may have more. You need to decide what data is important to have in the new system and how many years you need to bring in. The more data, the longer it's going to take. Time frame. So they were able to do this in 9 months from start to finish. Cost, so they're paying $180,000 per year in Salesforce licenses and then $96K per year in ServiceMax licenses and support per year, and their total implementation cost was $385K. That metric I talked about earlier, that one-to-one license cost to implementation cost, you'll see that their implementation cost was a little bit higher, and that was due to some of the complexities with their migration and integration, but somewhat close. Okay, the outcome, and I want to let you guys know that this is an actual picture of our customer for this one. You can see how delighted they were with the results. The customer was able to decommission hardware and software costs of $300K per year. That is offset with the ongoing service costs for the cloud application, but it's still less. Customer satisfaction increased by 15%, and that was not just a guess, that was actually based on surveys that were measured, that measured response times and job completion. Adoption increased over 40% due to enhanced functionality, mobile capabilities, and faster, easier system access. Okay, so I'm going to now hand it over to Larry, who's going to be speaking about some of the specific compliance areas when doing a legacy app migration.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone, for joining. The reason we started with talking about the general aspects of migrating to cloud is that in the life sciences area, we most frequently see the people have started with non-GXP applications and migrated them to the cloud, and then discover after the fact that there are compliance considerations, usually when they're starting to integrate it with other systems. But in general, if you look at the USDM website, we have many webinars and papers that we've delivered on cloud, because what happened with life sciences is there was basically an avalanche of migration to the cloud over the last 3 years, let's say. And much of that was not a well-informed migration. All of the benefits that Brian has outlined have driven an enormous recognition of the value of moving to a cloud and all of the various iterations that you can have of cloud architectures. And unfortunately, many of them were not assessed for regulatory considerations and evolved into regulatory compliance situations, often unwittingly and after the fact. So what we want to discuss here is the mindset that's needed to build upon Brian's points to make sure that you do this in a compliant manner. And one of the ways we do that here is use a model that tends to help people understand what they're actually dealing with when they move from their traditional legacy application structures where they're internally hosting them to a cloud-based architecture. So if you look at your internally hosted application situation as the base case, you've got your GXP applications and processes using internal applications over here on the left. See if I can make that work. And then on the right, you've got your IT organization and all of your applications and infrastructure that are supporting it. Actually, the applications and infrastructure platform are over here. And then here is your IT organization that are binding the two together. And while that model generally works very well, and we won't say it's easy to do, when you're dealing with this within one company, you have a huge advantage that most people don't think about or take for granted. You've got presumably shared IT SLAs. You've got an internal IT organization. You may bring in contractors and outside organizations to work within that framework, but you do enjoy a direct relationship with your IT provider, and as well, you would be having a shared quality management system. You'd be within a framework of quality that's been specified by your quality assurance and validation groups. They specify the policies and procedures to be used to maintain compliance, which of course start with development of requirements, change control, document control, training, documentation, all of those things that underlie a properly qualified and validated GXP application framework would be in place if you've come up the compliance maturity model, which we talk about in other webinars at USDM. So while this is a huge advantage because you are working within a shared policy framework, and there is accountability directly, and there are many recourses in case of difficulties, as well as many shared successes with a team environment that's within a known framework. But when you move, if I can get this to work here. Oops, sorry. Having a little navigation difficulty here. There we go. When you move to a cloud-based application, the model changes substantially. On this side, you have your internal quality management system as you had before, and you've got your GXP processes, which are now using a SaaS application, and you have your internal IT organization and your internal quality management system and quality assurance group as you did before. But now, on the right side, you have a vendor involved in the equation. So you have a vendor quality management system, presumably. You would have a vendor IT organization. And the question is, what are the IT SLAs? When you move from the internal to the external, you're now depending on the vendor's IT structure, their policies, their procedures. You've also got a GMP compliance gap potentially in terms of the fact that your vendor needs to have its own quality management system. And the framework that we usually refer to at USDM is that, and from an FDA standpoint, is that because you outsource to a cloud, a compliant application, a validated application, you can't presume that there's any less standards of compliance applied to a cloud application than if you're internally hosting your application. So in an audit, people are still looking for the same levels of documentation, the same levels of assurance that an application is validated, that it works on a controlled platform that has SOPs surrounding it. Well, now some of those involve your SOPs and some of them also involve a vendor. So the question is, how do you address these two gaps? And so there's a real question mark over that. So the way we describe this here in a non-graphical manner is the recognition that before you had an internally hosted application, now you have a hosting external to your organization, and you've got a loss of control of management, real-time oversight, and training activities and documentation at some level, among other things. You may have within your own organization a single tenant model where in your architecture you have a single physical or virtual database and application server dedicated to a validated application. Now you may be in a multi-tenant database model where you are sharing your application within the same virtual server with other clients of the vendor, as well as your database may be multi-tenant as well, in which it's being shared in the same physical database and possibly even logical database as other clients and presumably possibly competitors. So there's a lot of security considerations and availability that goes along with this. We talked about the quality system governance, where you now move from an internal to an external. And so you're still accountable for the quality system, but now you've got a supplier in the equation. So In addition to your own quality system that you have to conform to, you have to make sure that the supplier relationship is maintained in accordance with how you would typically deal with a supplier, as well as the fact that is their quality system acceptable to QA and to the FDA. Accessibility changes. So as Brian indicated, you have to not only know that you can audit these, but the FDA can also audit if necessary, which is an unlikely scenario, but certainly your supplier audits would need to be maintained, and you may not have the same understanding on the part of SaaS vendors for that kind of access as you may do from, let's say, a contract manufacturer who's GXP compliant. And then when it comes to change control, you determine internally in your own internally hosted applications how you're going to manage your change control, along with your partners in QA and other departments, of course, in the business. But now when you move to an externally controlled infrastructure and application, you've got potentially a clash of vendor and client deployment cultures and schedules. And we've seen a good number of this. People are adjusting to different cloud vendors, some of which have a very flexible model where you can sort of set your own schedule, and others which force you every quarter to upgrade, if not at the platform level, then perhaps at the application level. So this really needs to be assessed and understood. And there are many other factors, as Brian alluded to. Integration considerations change markedly. If you've got an interface to your existing internal legacy applications, those have to be considered, not to mention the data migration. So how do we manage these? As Brian indicated, you've got your on-site vendor audits that are required for any supplier that's supporting critical GXP applications or processes. And we recommend that this happen early in the contracting process, perhaps even before you sign, so that you really know what you're getting into and everybody is on the same page. You codify that with a detailed service level agreement with the SaaS or cloud supplier. And you also want to make sure that you understand how many suppliers are really involved. There are some SaaS software vendors who take on hosting responsibilities, but in fact are using an external data center. And they may have various levels of control of that infrastructure depending on their agreements with their hosting supplier. So that needs to be understood as to who's really got the control of your infrastructure and what levels of change are in whose control. And we have a separate webinar that we've at the USDM website where we discuss specifically all the various variations of cloud-based supply of services in this area. We also recommend that you get your QA group involved and have a formal quality agreement with the supplier. And that often goes beyond just the SLA, which IT organizations are very commonly executing. This would actually be more in the bailiwick of the quality and validation groups to have a formal quality agreement, which could be part of your standard SLA or added to it or as an addendum, which really gets into what's their quality system look like? How do you manage change controls coming out of your area, the business or IT, or at the vendor? And how do you know what's going on? Basically, that's the visibility issue. Make sure that you've got clarity on the security of a multi-tenant architecture, that your interfaces are formally qualified, and that you document the fact in your qualification that you've assessed these and that they're within industry standards. As Brian said, you've got to have clear rights to your information, because if they go out of business or they don't fit your model anymore, you've got to get your data back and figure out how you're going to do that in a compliant manner. System and data recovery processes. This is a very important benefit of cloud, is that they should have very much world-class recovery capabilities. You would want to expect some type of qualification documentation from the vendor related to your deployment, as well as generic documentation as to how they generally manage their environment to make sure that versioning is correct, that you can be sure that your configuration is maintained through changes, that those can be recovered in case there is a problem or a transition to another data center. We do not recommend that you accept traditional data center SAS 70 and its successors or ISO certifications exclusively, because often they fall short of Part 11 platform standards of documentation and compliance. Often, I mean, as all of you have known who have been through audits, either by the FDA or a very comprehensive quality audit, there are levels of standards of auditing and documentation that often don't get executed with ISO audits. And we've seen that as we've come behind some of these audits, doing our own audits for clients with the GXP perspective, and find that they wouldn't meet an FDA audit standard. And of course, we recommend that you partner with an experienced IT compliance firm that can help you navigate all of these uncertainties, and especially develop a framework for your assessment process as to how do you move into this area. And the last thing I'd mentioned is we have many other slides that we haven't included here, because this is just scraping the surface for an overview. But when it comes to integration and data migration, those projects themselves can be substantial. They need to be done in a compliant manner. If you're moving from a validated application that you're hosting internally with your own database controls, you're now moving to an externally hosted and controlled situation. You're moving data. You have to show that data migration was done in a compliant manner with a data migration plan and all the rest of the things that you would typically do if you were doing this with your own internal architectures. So with that, I'll leave it open for questions, and back to Becky.
Thank you so much, Larry. Boy, lots of information there, huh? So thank you all thank you both Brian and Larry for presenting that information, and thanks to all for hanging in there with us to get through so much in such a short period of time. While you're typing in your questions, we would like you to know that the webinar is being recorded, and it'll be available on the USDM website later this afternoon or first thing tomorrow. Again, I see familiar faces there, names on the session, and thank you for taking the time to join us in continued education here around leading edge in compliance. So a lot of you are familiar. For those of you who are not, I would just share that we do have several options for supporting your projects and compliance initiatives. Both our project teams, the project team supports the start and finish compliance, as well as the staff augmentation. We can also support you in compliance from start to finish, but it's different. It's more of a helping you to meet deadlines through offering you team members with very specific skill sets that can help you meet your compliance goals. Let's move on here to the questions. Looks like the first one is from John, and he's asking, how do I determine, oh Larry, I'm sorry, this question is for you. How do I determine if my application is subject to the compliance requirements you discussed?
Well, thanks, John. That's a good question. And we just touched on it briefly. Well, obviously, if you are talking about a legacy application that you've already validated, then it would maintain the need to maintain that validated state. And so those by default would still need to fall under that bailiwick. But what often happens, and what we've seen, is people in the process of moving to a cloud architecture and looking for all those advantages also throw in additional requirements and functionalities that they want, which often involve interfacing to their existing legacy applications, some of which could be validated. So we often see someone moving to a cloud-based CRM, for example, and they would like to now actually be able to access their ERP system for decision-making in the field by the salespeople or people managing trunk stock, and even submit orders when they're sitting there with a customer, browse stock, and do things that would be considered GXP. Well, those are all very reasonable types of functionality to look for, but by doing so, if you're moving data back and forth between your cloud application, which primarily, let's say, for example, was mostly focused on sales in the past in the case of a CRM, and now you're starting to do ERP type of transactions, that data needs to be maintained in a compliant manner, and so the path that it takes to whoever on the CRM side is making decisions or submitting transactions back and forth needs to be demonstrated to be in a validated manner. So by doing so, you suddenly expose your cloud environment to the requirements of compliance. So those are two of the biggest. The issue really revolves around what data are you using in the cloud. Is it potentially higher risk data? Could it affect your device or your inventory or traceability? If things are happening in the field where you're moving stock around or making fixes and repairs, and you need to be able to track that, let's say for a medical device, that application needs to be most likely validated.
Thank you, Larry. Okay, this is a fun question. Satendra would like to know, what is the FDA's thinking on the cloud?
Well, this is, if I can take that first, this is something that they've been going around for a few years now, and they've been looking for input. But the most definitive thing we've seen so far, specifically for the more traditional type of application as opposed to mobile and medical devices on the healthcare side, which they've come down to with some guidances, is related to an IVT seminar that they gave earlier this year in Philadelphia, I believe, and we have it posted up on our website. And they did address what they were looking for in an audit of a cloud. The way it came out was they were looking for qualification documents. Of course, the application is always going to have to be validated if the application is dealing with validated or GXP type of data, either historically or in its new architecture. But they've also come down indicating that they need to see some type of qualification documents, just as they would see in an internally hosted environment. Now, they may be of a different nature, a different form, because of the nature of certain cloud architectures. You may not have a one-to-one relationship between hardware and software and application, but you need to be able to demonstrate that this has been assessed, that there's been testing, that it's properly deployed on a version and configuration that is suitable to the application, all of the that the people managing the application and its support are trained, that there is an SOP governing it, whether that be resident within your organization or in the vendor's organization, preferably. So that model still holds. Otherwise, if FDA was to accept a lesser standard and say, well, you can just audit them and I don't need a qualification document, well, then suddenly no one has to qualify anything if you outsource it, and a major layer of certainty regarding the nature of the underlying platform for your validation, your validated application, and the data that it's creating would be lost. Now, the nature of those will vary depending upon the nature of the migration and the nature of the architecture that you've selected and the security associated with it and who controls which layer. So that's why a very rigorous assessment is needed at the early stages of a project on the compliance side as well as on the IT side and the business side to make sure the three-legged legs of that stool are all accounted for and are justifiable in an audit situation.
Tremendous. Thank you, Larry. A follow-on question from Satendra. Would you consider a cloud environment for a U.S. firm being managed in other countries?
Well, I think by definition that is something that you get in some of these cases when you're talking about 24-hour support. There are regional data centers that are in use by some of the largest organizations. You may not know exactly where your application is running, and that's why it's important to make sure the management is aware of your model and has the proper management in place from a GXP perspective wherever it's running. So if they have two data centers, it would be appropriate for you to document the environments or make sure they have documentation of the environments and verify that. And we do see clients going and auditing all the data centers that their application can possibly run in. And we have performed those audits for clients as well in other countries. So because what can happen is often you may see a recovery site in Asia for a U.S.-based hosting organization, and if they do have to fail over to that site or for whatever other reason, maintenance, it's running there, you want to know that it's equivalent to your routine production environment. But it is certainly something that's being done. Any other questions?
Thank you, Larry. Sorry, it sounds like we had a little strangeness on the phone. My apologies. We do have another question. Thank you so much. This is from Laura, asking how can she be sure that the cloud vendor understands and can comply with the compliance requirements for cloud hosting?
Well, that's based on your own R&D primarily. Again, unfortunately, we've seen that people have rushed in without taking the typical due diligence that we see with supplier activities in life sciences when it comes to, let's say, manufacturing. I like to look at these outsourced cloud environments as a variation of outsourcing regulated manufacturing that life sciences firms and medical device firms do all the time. And there are very well-defined models for how you make sure that your vendor in a manufacturing GXP situation is compliant, including supplier audits, of course, but also as part of those audits, you are documenting and verifying their own quality system at the vendor, and so that involves a lot of interaction. So this is where early on establishing a quality agreement in addition to the traditional IT type of SLA or business SLA is important, because you really have to get down to brass tacks. What do they understand about my compliance requirements that I'm handing off to them partially? And you always have to remember, whatever you hand off to the vendor, that's something you've decided to do. You're still responsible for it ultimately as far as the FDA is concerned. So when you hand off that responsibility, or delegate, I should say, that responsibility for operational control of those critical functions, IT or business, that you need to verify that they have the wherewithal to do that. And that is ascertaining their training records, their SOPs, how do they manage and review and approve changes, things of that nature. Those are all the critical factors, just as you would for your internally hosted organization.
Thank you, Larry. Okay, we have a question for Brian, please. This one is from Susan. Our existing application is fine from a functionality standpoint, but doesn't meet our needs for reporting or mobile. Can I use my existing system as model and just duplicate it onto a cloud platform?
Okay. Yeah, this actually works really well. So your current system is capturing the data you need. It has all the correct workflows to remain compliant. Adoption is good, but it's time to make a change because, like you said, there's not an easy way to access data on a mobile device. Creating and running reports takes too long. So you could tell a group like us, another implementer, just give me what I have today on a cloud platform so I can take advantage of the reliability, the mobility, the reporting, etc. Yes, I see that all the time, and that it actually cuts down on the requirements phase of a project if we can use your existing system, as you said, as the model for building things out on the cloud-based system. So it's a good way to save money if you do have a system that's working well today and want to move it to the cloud.
Mm-hmm. And follow-on question, again from Susan. One of the legacy applications has 5 or 6 different systems that it integrates, so they're hesitant to make any changes. What are the integration options for going to the cloud?
Yep. So integration with cloud applications can often be easier than with legacy on-prem applications. Cloud-based applications are open architecture. They have APIs and pre-built tools and middleware apps that will help you with this. And software vendors such as SAP and Oracle have connectors that are often free, that provide that data sharing capabilities between a cloud-based application and something like SAP. Cloud-based apps, often use what are called web services or REST API that can be used if you do want to write any of your own integration code. Now, with 5 or 6 different systems to basically repoint to the new cloud application, you're definitely going to want a good amount of planning and testing to make sure that everything works in the same way. And as Larry said, that there are compliance implications when doing integration. So you want to make sure that you're taking those into account.
Thank you so much. Okay, we have a question from Greg. How do you address the validation needs for tools used by cloud vendor and developing tools which the client uses that touch or informs quality systems for the 21 CFR Part 820?
If I can take that, the question, of course, is which types of tools you're referring to and under what scenario. So again, it always comes down to an assessment of what role is being played and to what degree it may affect data or integrity. So it's hard to have a general question. So as an example, SOPs are a major way that you verify for within a vendor that they have certain types of standards and controls and documentation as to their use of a tool. People don't go around qualifying network management tools and database management tool sets or program development tool sets traditionally. You're really, from a validation standpoint, we're focusing on what's the end result and how is it being deployed and how do I know that there's been testing of the end result against a set of requirements that are understood or well known. And is there a recovery path? So if someone is going to run a major job on a database to compress it or make it more efficient or move it, that process needs to be documented. And you would want to see that the vendor has that well documented. And of course, usually you look at this based on what's the risk profile of the tool or the process that's being used. Traditionally, this is what the qualification does. The qualification is focused on has the application and the underlying platform been installed? Is it a compatible environment? Are there SOPs surrounding that environment and not just the production environment, of course, but the process of moving activities from that have been tested, let's say an application code from a test environment into production or an underlying database upgrade, things of that nature. It all comes down to how do you ascertain that the application that's already been validated remains in a validated state. One of the ways we do that is as an example with Salesforce, we have a package where we are doing routine audits of Salesforce's platform, which is available to our clients to demonstrate the compliance profile of Salesforce platform. And then we also assess each release and determine its potential impact on validated Force applications and qualify those functions on a periodic basis. So you generally want a program in place that provides an underlying foundation for demonstrating compliance in a cloud situation.
Tremendous. Thank you so much. And I think with that, we need to wrap up the session. Thank you again for all contributing such tremendous questions, and thank you, gentlemen, for presenting today. We do appreciate the opportunity to share information and to help you through any pain points or offer direction and support as we can. I would encourage you all to take a look at USDM.com. Our website there has a a link, a tab rather, that's all about the webinars that we've previously presented, and there are some terrific informational pieces out there, over 50 sessions I believe at this point, all on different topics, but again all about compliance. We do appreciate you taking the time to team with us today, and certainly we appreciate the opportunity to team with you towards working for excellence in compliance. Thank you so much. I hope you all enjoy the day.